Do you find painting reflections a little bit of a challenge? Do you want an easy reflection type scene to paint? Well, this is Padstow Harbour in Cornwall, UK, and a very simple way of painting realistic reflections in a harbour scene. So, hello, my name is Tim Wilmot. I'm a watercolour painter based in the UK, and I produce full-length watercolour tutorials like this one to help improve your painting. So in this painting, in this demonstration, I'm going to go through the complete process with, first of all, looking at the source photo. And painting from a photograph, there's a knack to it. Some people frown on it. I particularly quite like painting from photographs. So I will be going through my source photo for this Padstow Harbour scene and picking out what is it, what actually attracted me to the scene, and how will I plan my painting looking at that source photo. Then I'm going to take you through the drawing stage, the all-important drawing stage. If I don't get the drawing right, the painting is going to be rubbish. So in my mind, that drawing has to be as good as I can make it before I then go on to the painting stage. So I'll cover the complete painting process, and we're going to cover a number of different watercolor techniques: laying down a wash, using wet in wet, dry brush marks, lifting out as well, lifting off, lifting out. You'll see me do that. So a lot of different watercolor techniques, and using body paint as well, using thick paint without too much water. Maybe a little bit of a no-no to some of the traditionalists, but I'm going to be using it. So the complete painting process right through to the detail stage, and a bit of a summary, a bit of a sort of debrief, as I normally would do on a painting, trying to look at a painting, to spend a few minutes just looking over it and think, well, what went okay, what could be improved on the next time I do a similar scene, just to help try and improve things going forwards. So I hope you like it, and let's get to it. This is my source photo. This is Padstow in Cornwall, UK. Very pretty and popular tourist destination, a harbour, an enclosed harbour with buildings around three sides of that harbour. And a nice scene here. What attracted me to this? Well, it's got good composition straight away. I like the light hitting the left-hand side of that middle building. The combination of these, the larger boat there and the little boat next to it, and there's some boats over here as well. I like the angles that I see as well. So we've got a diagonal angle there. We've got these diagonals that are repeated all over the place, and then of course their reflections. This is all about reflections. Those reflections there as well. From a watercolor point of view, good range of contrasts, lots of lights, lots of darks. Well, we've got the light hitting the left-hand side of that building, and then the really dark in there as well, dark in that little recess in the corner of the harbour. But this is all about reflections, and an easy reflection scene to paint. The water surface is fairly calm. There's just a little bit of a gentle breeze maybe, and we've got a few little ripples and waves here, but quite easy to paint. The main thing to think about, obviously, it's a mirror image on a sort of glassy surface like this, a mirror image, but also the colours of those reflections. So not only the shape, and because we don't have many waves here, the shapes are quite easy to do. It's just a mirror image. So imagining that's the halfway line there. Quite an easy reflection to draw, but then the colours, the values of those reflections. So going back to my left-hand side of that wall there, look how bright that is, and then its reflection is just a little bit darker. Might be the next value along on the darkness scale. Then just above that white area, that bright red wall, what's a little bit duller and a little bit darker, just a tiny bit darker for the reflection. And then look at the edge of the reflection. So with reflections, I do a little bit of observation. So just looking at the shapes of those reflections and trying to think, what brush would I use to do that? So we've got little sort of elliptical shapes all connected with each other, almost in a random fashion, but it's because the water's not too wavy, it's quite calm. They're going to be fairly easy to paint. Another design thing, verticals. So we've got some strong verticals, this white post here, and then the reflection of that. And notice how the reflection gets a little bit more erratic as we come down to the bottom. So that white pole there starts off, the reflection starts off fairly straight, and then it gets just a little bit more wavy towards the bottom. Likewise with the other things like that drain pipe there, gets a little bit more wavy down towards the bottom. So good range of values, a good composition, nice strong angles to contemplate, and a very easy reflection, a very simple boat scene. We don't have loads of boats here. We just concentrate on 2 or 3 boats. And the other thing to consider in this is simplification. We've got lots of detail. I mean, the more you look at this, you can see all the people on the harbour side, and they're in different poses. Some sat on the harbour wall, standing up. The windows as well in the buildings, and then you think, well, some of the windows are showing some reflections, and some are dark and some are light. And there's lots of street furniture on the harbour side, notices, bollards, railings, litter bins. So we've got to keep things fairly simple, and also paint in a loose way. That I'm going to be painting in a fairly loose style. The danger here is that if you look at all those details, you'll be painting in quite a tight style. Me, I'm going to be painting in a loose style. So try and get done in about an hour. So we'll go through the complete process, as I've said. But the next stage is the all-important drawing stage. For this painting, I'm using Saunders Waterford watercolor paper. This is cold press, and it is 300 grams in weight, 15 inches by 11 inches. I've just mixed up imperial and metric there, apologies. So it's 140 pounds and 15 inches by 11 inches. And it's secured by some masking tape. I'm often asked, do you stretch your paper or pre-wet? Well, I don't. I just tape it down, and the paper will buckle, but I don't really mind. It won't buckle too much. And when it dries, it will go really flat again. So with a 3B pencil, I'm getting in the main shapes here. This main boat just to the left of the center. There's the back of the boat, the front, another little boat. Just in front of it to the right-hand side, just so that it's not on its own. And then an indication roughly of the edges of the reflections. So deciding where to start drawing in the very first place, sometimes I'll actually start painting the main focal point in the painting, which will be around the center of the paper. Other times I might just work left to right or top to bottom. But now I'm getting in the main roof shapes, the main building shapes. Need to get those Absolutely right. And think about the mirror image of those in the reflections. I'll keep things fairly simple, particularly down to the right. The buildings are a little bit more complicated in their shapes and the edges of the rooftops. So this is the main building here in the middle. There's a little bit of perspective to think about here, and think about the rooftops as well, trying to make them convincing and symmetrical. Here's the chimney top, main chimney, and then there's a row of buildings just to the left that are set back just a tiny bit from the quayside buildings. And they're creating a little bit of a shadow across the middle buildings. That's the quayside. Just a rough indication of where people might be and little bits and pieces on the quayside. Now this main building, I'll call it a two-tone building because it's reddish on the top and a lighter colour on the bottom. Two-tone building, and I think on the lower level there's sort of ice cream shops or souvenir shops, something like that. So the bottom of the harbour wall, to the left of the boat, to the right of the boat, going over to the main slipway, and the reflection of the two-tone building, corner. I'm just sort of standing back and thinking, where will the edge of that reflection be? And this is going to be slightly easier because there's not a lot of movement in the water. It's quite calm conditions, really. Just a tiny bit of movement causing some little ripples. That's the middle of two-tone building. And that dividing line. Then the buildings on the right-hand side, thinking about their reflections. Rooftop, over to the right-hand side. Make things a little bit stronger, emphasize them with an extra line on top. Again, just a few little bits and pieces on the quayside, which I'll just give the impression of that quite loose style, as they say, loose style. That's the bottom of the slipway and a boat just to balance things off on the right hand side. Top of the boat and the reflection. Just emphasize those lines there. And that is pretty much it for the drawing stage. Getting in the main shapes and getting right in my own mind where the reflections are going to be. And then on to next step, painting, which is laying down the wash, covering most of the paper, apart from areas that I deliberately want to keep light. Just go through my palette, my colours on the right hand side, starting from the top, neutral tint, then burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, viridian green, cobalt green, cerulean blue, and cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson. So this is mainly cobalt here and a little bit of cerulean blue. But I'm laying down an even wash, going over the rooftops. This will dry lighter. Now I was going through the colours, wasn't I? Cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, Windsor red, light red, cadmium orange, and lemon yellow. Down the bottom, I do have a lavender, which I sometimes use. That's a nice sort of opaque-ish type colour. Brush I'm using is a synthetic mop brush. And just now going in with the rooftops, the top edge of the buildings with a thicker colour. Now going into that sky mix, but there's not going to be an awful lot of movement from the brown to the blue, because this paint now is a thicker consistency than the sky wash, so behave themselves. I won't get any nasty blooms appearing or cauliflowers. A little bit lighter over to the right hand side. I'm gradually working down the paper. Two-tone building. Getting the top layer of red. So we'll go darker. This is just the base level. So getting in the correct red of the wall that's facing the sun. Down to that dividing line between the first floor and the ground floor. There's the lower level, a little bit darker. It's on the shady side of the building. All the way down. Really, it's just that white wall of two-tone building and the boats. They'll be left unpainted, but pretty much everything else is going to be covered in this stage. Burnt sienna, yellow ochre, The rooftops here, they've got quite a lot of lichen growing on the rooftops that gives them almost it gives them these striking orange patches over the roof, over the, I think they're slate roofs down that part of the world, because the air is so clean and quite moist. It does encourage these lichens to grow on the rooftops. See if I can try and create the illusion of that. Might be just a little bit too much detail for this one. Paint carefully around the boat. This now, we're into the water here, into the harbour. So this now is the start of the colour of the reflected two-tone building, the light part of the lower story. And thinking about reflections, things that are lighter above, they're going to be a level or two darker in their reflection. Likewise with that red, gone a bit darker in colour, more intense, a darker red than the colour of the building above. Carefully paint around the right-hand side of those boats. Now this is the harbour wall on the far side, on the right-hand side. Again, paint around that boat. Burnt sienna, burnt umber, a little bit of alizarin crimson. Going quite dark there at the base. This is the reflection of the boat on the right hand side. Come down a little bit. That's the first half of the reflection. And now I need to come right down to the bottom with the continuation of the water. And my plan is to keep it quite light, just where I finished off, and now go a lot darker towards the bottom of the painting. Doesn't matter if it bleeds a little bit here. So horizontal lines and go darker as I come down to the bottom. And you can see how thick the paint is now, because I left little marks. With the surface of the paper, I left little marks there. There is a slight gradient on the paper of about 10 degrees or so, just a slight incline. Gravity will play a part in just merging those bands together. Just very gently, and I need to be very careful now with the use of the brush to not leave any brush marks. It's still quite damp, the paper, but if I go in heavy-handed in a heavy-handed way, then I will leave those brush marks. Or if I left it a little bit too late in mucking about with the brush and lifting off some paint, that too would cause, it would just leave marks, and you'd lose that freshness of the watercolor. With a hairdryer now, I've muted the hairdryer, a very silent hairdryer, and speed up the drying process. I could leave it to dry, but to be honest, I like the momentum of painting, and for me to start, I can't do that. My concentration wouldn't run to that. I need to do everything all in one go, so to speak. And that's why I'm speeding things up with this hairdryer here. If the paper did buckle a little bit, it will flatten out now really, really well. I'm going to be painting in the top part of the painting first of all, so I do need to make sure that is 100% dry. Not too concerned about the bottom part of the paper. By the time I get down to the bottom, that will be dry anyway. The time I take to go in with the darks, that will be dry, so I don't need to think about that too much. So this paper does need to be absolutely dry. If I go in with my darks before the paper dries perfectly, then I'm just going to end up with some nasty edges and possibly some of the odd things that watercolor does. Best to keep it all. Make sure it's nice and dry before I start on the darker phase. So this is, if I think of the painting as going through different stages, we've done the drawing. I've done the drawing. That's stage one. Stage two is the wash, covering over most of the paper, except those bits that I want to preserve light. For example, the lower level of two-tone building that is facing the light and those boats. And stage three now are the darks. Now, this is quite an important stage, and this will probably be, out of all of the stages in the painting, for me, this will take the longest. Because here I'm now adding in darker values to create the shadows, the shade, and depth in the painting. Now, I'm quite fortunate with this photograph that the background trees are framing the lighter colour buildings. So, done the buildings already. I will need to go in a little bit with some rooftops that are not catching the light. They're on the other side of they're not facing the sun. So these background hills, fairly light in value, not too dark. I'm using a different brush now. This is a medium-sized mop brush that, like the previous brush, it's got a good edge to it. It's got a good point to it. So I can be quite precise and accurate with my brush marks. And I'm using it, I'm holding it closer down towards the brush end. So I've got more control, not being as loose, if you like, in this stage. I want to be a little bit more precise, particularly with the negative painting around the rooftops and chimneys. Need to get those right. Little chimney there. I'm going darker down towards the base or the bottom of the trees to the rooftops. Almost a horizontal edge there, down the right hand side. Another chimney top, and then over to the right hand border, go over the masking tape. And that's suddenly giving a bit of an edge now to those buildings. They're suddenly beginning to look like buildings because they have those darker areas around them. Now I'm mixing up a bit of a classic shadow mix here, shady mix. Ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, alizarin crimson, which I'll mix the ratio of those colours. I'll keep changing as I come down the paint. I don't want to be too monochrome with that combination, so I will need to adjust that depending on the colour of the object that the shadow is on, or maybe some reflected colours as well. So for example, the red building, that might be casting a little bit of red light around it. So you could go a little bit red with the shadows from that or against that. This is a pure squirrel mop brush, so it's very soft and the brush hairs, they're not going to be too springy. Being a mop brush, it's got good water retention, good paint retention, holds a lot of paint. So I can cover a fairly large area without having to keep going back and mixing up. Now I'm coming a bit darker towards the base here of the building and a bit of a jagged bottom edge to give the impression of people or objects along the quayside. And some of these areas I'm painting around, I'm negatively painting around. When I review them, I could make them into people or cars or something, or a bench. The all-important now shadow across two-tone building, which I'm keeping fairly weak, so watercolor being made up very often of transparent layers on top of each other, so that you can see one layer will show will expose the colour of the layer below. And that's what I'm doing here. I've just hopefully subtly see that the top part of the reflection, the top part of the shadow has gone on the red half of the building, and the bottom bit will be a little bit lighter because it's going over the white paper. Rooftop of two-tone building, and starting off with a hard edge on the left-hand side, bit of a chimney. Now the right-hand side of this building is slightly higher, so I've got a little bit of a thin slither of sidewall that's showing there between the two halves. There it is here. Get a nice hard edge again. Complete that rooftop. Now a dark red for the top half of two-tone building. Almost horizontal middle line, and then a little bit darker on the right-hand side. Now the bottom half of two-tone building it's white, of course, but it's in the shadow now, so I need to go a little bit darker. Maybe not as dark as the top half of the building. It doesn't matter if I leave out just little bits of the paper unpainted. That I think is a little bit of the charm of a loose painting. Keeps it quite fresh, and those little marks could be anything that's catching the light, bit of architectural details, something on the quayside. Like the building on the left, the jagged edge down to the quayside, giving the impression of people wandering about. This brush has got quite a good edge to it, which I need for creating some nice accurate brush marks. So it's got a very nice edge, and it did have a point when I first got it, but sometimes with brushes they do lose their points, and infuriating with some brushes you lose when you lose hairs, invariably it's the middle ones, the most important ones, that create that point. But brushes still have a use. They've got a sort of personality of their own. As long as you get familiar with how the brush works, if you have only a few brushes, then it's going to be easier. But just almost intuition, knowing how much paint is on that brush, and when that brush touches the paper, you just know what it's going to do. Shadows on the right-hand side, again, is quite an attractive what I'm going for is a nice sort of 45-degree angle on these far buildings. Darker down towards street level. Use a bit of neutral tint to go quite dark towards the base. There I am using that edge again. Almost random marks that sometimes can create something recognizable. Continuing the shadow over to the right hand side. Now, this far right building, it's not getting too much sun at all, so that is going to be quite dark. And being on the right hand side, I don't need to be too concerned with lots of detail. It's on the side over there, quite simple. Halfway done then on the reflections. Next, I need to start from the top of the harbour wall, work my way down to the water edge, and then continue on with probably the most important bit of the whole painting, getting these reflections about right on the harbour surface. Right, mix up something fairly dark, ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, burnt sienna. Top of the harbour wall is not, strictly speaking, a perfect straight edge. There's little sort of indentations where there's something lying over the edge of the harbour, or a little, like there, a little sort of indentation where maybe there's some steps, or there's just a slight change in a little sort of bend in the harbour wall. So not make it too perfectly straight. But I need to, again, do a bit of careful painting around the top of this main boat, this yacht. Right over to the corner of the harbour and that slipway. Continue down the harbour wall. Might close in some of those gaps, some of those bits I've left unpainted. Around the left-hand side of the stern of that boat. Another 45-degree shadow, which is, I'm sort of playing on a repetitive pattern. There's quite a few 45-degree angles all over the place. The the angle of the rooftops, the angle of the shadows, and the angle of that shadow there. Down to the water now, slight change in colour, a little bit of cobalt green added to this. There it is there, cobalt green. Make sure there's plenty of paint on the brush. I don't want to have to keep mixing up new paint. I want to keep the momentum going. So I made a mistake there, put too much paint on that, or put paint where it shouldn't have gone. So as soon as I spot it, I can try lifting off with a finger. If that doesn't work, quickly pick up a paper tissue or a paper towel, and you can get rid of most of it, if not all of it, in time. Down towards the edge of these reflections, this is where I need to be a bit more careful now with using this mop brush and using the edge of that mop brush, creating these soft little ripples in the water, on the water surface. And not too many, but they're going to be slightly more erratic towards the edge here, where I am now, and then a little bit more controlled closer to the harbour wall. As with most things in watercolour, I don't want to overdo it, don't want to overwork it, but that's the first part on that left hand side. That's the first bit of those reflections done. I will tidy them up later on with a few more darker lines just to emphasize some of the waves a bit more. So here we are. Next important line, that corner of two-tone building. So the waves will get a little bit bigger and more erratic as they come down towards us. Make sure I've mixed up enough paint. Now I need to think about two-tone building, and slightly darker, the reflection needs to be slightly darker than the colour of the building. And redder, dark red for the top of two-tone building, and then there's those little ripples, little waves join the bottom half. Keep the angle of those waves about the same, so a slight angle, bottom left to top right. Now, just for the roof, the very edge of two-tone building, I'll get in a little bit of darker colour there just to really cover up that little white mark. And then connect with the shady part of the wall. Just check my lines that coming down vertically from the chimney, there's a little bit of reflection from that chimney. Mix a bit more cobalt green. I'm going now over to the slipway and the reflection of the far right buildings. The waves over here, they're going to be a little bit narrower, a little bit thinner than the waves on the left. That just needs to be a little bit deeper. Coming down to, I can just about see the pencil line I made for the edge of that reflection. Ultramarine blue, a little bit of burnt sienna, bit of neutral tint. Go quite dark with the right hand edge of that slipway, bit of a waterline for the slipway, and then up to the right hand boat. Carefully paint around that best I can. Another 45-degree shadow. Cobalt green. Fill in most of those little bits of paper I've left unpainted. Right hand edge of the boat. And then continue on down. Now I need to leave a little bit of a gap with the reflection of one of those rooftops in the right hand building. So now this will be the reflection of the trees, hopefully. You can see with this brush the marks you can make with a mop brush with sort of half, I would say half loaded with paint, not fully loaded, not particularly dry, but making those sort of elliptical shapes, if that's the right word, those wave shapes, just to give the impression of some waves. Now, need to join up here, paint over to the right hand side, maybe go a little bit lighter in places. Keeping that angle that, again, it's sort of about, what would it be, about sort of 10 degrees off the horizontal. Now I'm sort of transitioning now into the fourth stage of the painting, the detail stage. So I've done the main shadows, the darks, the reflections, the rooftops, all the big darker areas, the background trees as well. That's going to give that gave the painting the depth and the form. Now with a smaller synthetic brush, I'm going in for some smaller details in the painting, architectural details, windows on the buildings, boat details. We'll be painting the mast shortly as well. And the paint here is quite thick. It's not too much water to it. Now I don't want to put too much detail, particularly on the bits in the shade, because it could just look a little bit too overworked. So there's going to be a balance here. And with the windows, not painting in every single window, not perfect windows as such. And if you like, imperfect windows, they're not a rectangular shape. They're just little marks with the brush that will give a fairly loose feel to the painting. I need to add on, I could have done this with the medium-sized mop brush, but I've got this brush now, getting in a little bit of a darker right-hand edge to some of these buildings that will help give the form of the rooftops. And then a few windows, horizontal shadows. Yeah, a few more windows on the right hand building. Over to the edge. That should be fine. And then reflection of some of those windows. Of the two-tone building. I think I just need to lift off some of the paint there. It's gone a little bit too dark. And just carefully dabbing with this tissue that's got a fairly flat or smooth edge to it, not too crumpled. And just in some areas of the building, not too much. You can overdo it with this sort of technique. Use the hairdryer just to speed up the drying, because I want to go in with some darker paint. I want to get a few hard edges, so I want to make sure everything is very dry. Turn that off. That should be a lot drier now. The right-hand side of the boat needs to be a little bit darker, but not as dark as its reflection. So I've got to be quite careful here, making sure it's not as dark as the reflection. If the reflection's a little bit too light, then I can always glaze over it, which is what I'm doing here, just going with a slightly darker colour, and that should be just the right value for that. Those little objects I painted around on the quayside, I'm now going in with my smaller brush and attempting to make something out of them. Add in a little few dabs of red. They could be people's faces or life buoys on the quayside. There's some fenders for the boats. Just repeat that red just around the painting in a few places, not too much. With this small brush now, just adding in a few horizontal lines, giving some form to that harbour wall. Neutral tint, burnt umber, and make the waterline along the harbour wall a bit darker. Over from the right-hand side of the main boat over to the slipway, and then right-hand side. Waterline of the boat. That can just make it suddenly a little bit more realistic as a boat sat on the water by getting in that darker waterline. There we are on that main boat, and the little boat to the side, a little bit of a dark waterline, plus just below the top of the boat along the gunwale, a nice line, painted line, a dry brush mark, not too much water on that, so I get a few little bits of the paper showing through, dry brush mark, and then thinking about the reflections as well of those. mark on the right hand side boat, along the top of the gunwale. Maybe a few aerials. Just needs to add a bit more interest to the top there. Just a few marks to give the implication of some aerials or lampposts behind or something like that. That's the water line on the right hand side of the slipway, and then over on the right hand side just a few more darker lines there. Just in that corner to the right hand side of two-turn building, it's quite dark in that corner, so I need to get in a darker reflection. And with this dark paint now, two smaller ripples in the water, keeping that same angle, about 10 degrees or so. Should look a little bit more realistic as the surface of the harbour. Neutral tint. Some window reflections. Make some of those windows a bit darker. I'm just adding a few more darks to objects on the quayside, making up some figures. Now there's one obvious thing missing for a harbour scene, and that's some masts, which I'm going to use some white paint for this. This is white gouache straight out of the tube with a brush, a synthetic brush that's got a good point to it, and be fairly careful to draw in some of these verticals Not a complete line, bit of lost and found, a few gaps in that line. Make it a bit stronger in places, a bit thicker towards the bottom. A few side supports. And another one over here. Just think where the top will be. And then coming down to the boat. And then make that one just a little bit taller. Now the reflection of those masts, fairly straight, starting off with, then getting a little bit more erratic down towards the bottom. A few more vertical lampposts or something on the left-hand side, just to balance things up a bit. I feel it needs something on the left-hand side. A couple of lampposts or something there, and two reflections. Perhaps a ladder just coming over the side of the harbour wall. A few little bits of railings and fencing along the quayside. Now, using white painting watercolor, it's not to everyone's liking, and I think if you do use it, you've just got to be careful not to overdo it, and be vigilant and know when to stop. Just think it needs another little lamppost or something in there, and then a reflection. And this white paint is a sort of permanent white, so it shouldn't, over the years, it shouldn't go yellow or off colour. Little bit of a shadow to the cabin on top of that boat. And that's it done. My end painting then, Padstow in Cornwall, and an easy reflection scene. So what did I cover? Well, the importance of choosing a good photograph for a painting that's got the basics of a good composition, a good range of values as well. So it's trying to get in the real darks in the painting, the real lights in the painting as well. A good combination of horizontals and verticals. So we've got the horizontal line of the harbour wall. We've got some verticals with the mast as well, and trying to get a balance between those verticals also. The focal point of the painting, well, probably those boats there, just to the left of the center line. Of course, it's all about reflections, so easy reflections, not too much movement in the water, and just thinking, choosing the right brush shape and observing the edges of the reflections and trying to plan and think and try not to overwork those reflections. Plan and think your approach, but keeping it nice and simple with this one. And basically all of these reflections, the edges are quite straight, but then when we come down towards us to the end of the reflection, they get a little bit more erratic. So good range of values, trying to keep things loose as well, with just an impression of maybe some figures. Maybe that could be a couple of figures there walking along the signpost and things over on the right-hand side of the harbour, on the right-hand side of the painting. Just an impression, the way that I've done a bit of negative painting to give the impression of those objects. And then a design element, these angles that are repeated through the painting. I think that sort of works from a design point of view. And we covered a lot of watercolor techniques. So laying down a wash with the sky, a graded wash there. We're going light, we're going dark. We've done wet in wet. We've used some body paint there, body color, just to go in with very little water on top of that. We've got a range of values. So a combination of lights and darks. Hope you like it. Easy reflections, and then catch up with you next time.